What's up, fellas? Today I filmed my secondary overhead session for you guys. You're gonna have to pardon my voice. The smoke here has not cleared up much, and I have pathetic weak lungs, so it's been treating me pretty rough. I started the workout with these lat pull downs because I always like warming up with the antagonistic motion. It just helps me with my cues, pulling myself into position rather than wedging myself into position on various motions. And then after my top set, or after each of my sets, I did a 10 count loaded stretch just to make sure that my overhead position was reasonably okay, wasn't holding the bar out in front of me. That way I could drive the bar back, keep it over my midfoot during my overhead presses. Here's my first set of 8 at 225. One of my primary training goals this training block is to hit a 365 pound overhead press. I hit 355. The block before last, it moved reasonably well. I kind of want to hit that milestone of 3 plates and a quarter, so it's something I'm working on pretty hard here. This 225, kind of a warm-up, kind of a work set. You can kind of determine that for yourself. This was my primary set for the day, which was 255 pounds for a set of 8. I would call this reasonable form for myself. I've been holding myself accountable for trying to pause at the lowest point. You'll see I'm actually leaning backwards a little bit on these, which is not traditionally how I've done it and how I've advocated doing it. But in the case of training for strongman events, more often than not, regardless of what the implement is, you've got a backwards lean when you have it in the rack position. So training from that position makes more sense to me. That way I can get a greater range of motion as well. Wouldn't necessarily advocate this is the best way to have transfer over to the bench press for powerlifting. But for my purposes right now, that's how I'm choosing to train it. And then I hit a little bit of an ego set there where I went up to 275, hit it for 7. Pretty shit, but I think considering the pauses, I'm reasonably pleased with the strength. I would say the amount of backwards lean I was getting there is a product of not having the behind the neck presses in my program. Because I moved states and moved gyms, I didn't have access to a Smith machine, which is generally where I like to do my behind the neck presses, and so I dropped them from my program. I think that led to me being a little bit more dependent on a backwards lean than I would like to be, so I reintroduced them this training cycle, as you just saw there. And then I moved on to Powell raises. All the power, it sounds fancy, kind of often used in a rehabilitation setting, and they always like naming something really fancy that makes it sound like it's more advanced than it is. All it is a side-lying rear delt fly. I very much like these as far as free weight rear delt motion. You're actively loading a much greater percentage of the range of motion you can get from your rear delt as opposed to like a chest supported or a non-chest supported rear delt fly where you're fighting gravity only for the latter quarter of the motion at best. Whereas this, you can resist gravity for the majority of the motion. The strength curve seems to match up pretty well. It's kind of quickly become one of my favorite rear delt exercises. And then I moved on to lateral raises, worked up to I think 35s for a set of 20. I think that's what this is. For the behind the neck presses, I just worked up to 1 top set just because my bicep, like upper bicep tendons were a little bit finicky. Normally I would do a back down there. For the Powell raises, I worked up to 1 heavy set of like 13-ish, did a back down set of 20. Took the same approach on my lateral raises, worked up to this top set of 20 reps at 35s, then dropped back to the 25s for a set of 30. Then moved on to my final motion of the day, which is anytime I press, I do some kind of like tricep isolation type motion, whether it be 2 arm press downs, 1 arm press down, rope press downs, overhead extensions. I always do something, and I attribute religiously doing this and being really diligent about beating the books every single session, just chipping away 1 extra rep, 1 extra rep, add a little weight, 1 extra rep, 1 extra rep, add a little weight. Doing that for the majority of my training career, I think is one of the major reasons I've become such a good presser, and maybe if I had taken that same approach for other muscle groups that are important, I would be better at those lifts. But I do definitely think that's something I should attribute a lot of my success to, is just the religious pushing my beat the books on the smaller tricep motions. So I just worked up to 1 heavyish set of like I think 12, 13, something like that on the 1 arm ones, and then I dropped it back, hit it back down 20,